Alright folks, let's kick things off by shining a spotlight on a group you probably don't give nearly enough thought to, our cave-dwelling foremothers. While the guys were off measuring spear sizes and playing mammoth tag, and occasionally taking unplanned ravine dives, these women were basically running the entire prehistoric show. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and your local time. It's always wild to see our global crew tuning in. Now, set the mood, dim those lights, maybe crank up a fan for some white noise, and let's time travel together. Picture this, you're a cave woman at dawn, or at least you think it's dawn. Sundials haven't been invented yet, and watches won't exist for another 30,000 years. Your alarm clock? A freezing armpit draft, and a toddler's foot planted firmly on your face. You blink awake to pitch darkness, standard morning routine since the fire went out, again, and absolutely nobody else bothered to fix it. Especially not your mate, who's curled up by the ashes like a hibernating bear in a fur onesie. Dude didn't even bother to tan his own hides. You stretch and something cracks. Could be your spine, could be the cave floor. Either way, ouch. Your bed is basically a prehistoric futon stuffed with dried grass, leftover fur scraps, and whatever creepy crawlies your kids smuggled in last night. Pillows? Forget it. You've got what might charitably be called a softish rock that's done permanent damage to your neck alignment. The cave's packed tighter than a mammoth migration. 2 kids, 1 snoring adult, and a 3rd child already chewing on what's definitely an outside stick. Somewhere in the distance, another baby's wailing like a Stone Age car alarm with abandonment issues. You try sneaking out quietly. Epic fail. 1 kid immediately pops up announcing, in cave toddler gibberish, that they're starving. You grunt what roughly translates to "go lick a root," but they're not buying it. Morning routine kicks in. Head count check. Nobody wandered into a saber-tooth's mouth? Good. Cave entrance inspection. Clear of giant toothy predators? Excellent. Where's your wrap? Under the baby who's somehow sleeping diagonally and gained 10 pounds overnight. Slow mornings? Not in your vocabulary. The second your feet hit dirt, you're on duty for fire, food, warmth, safety, and chasing down the kid who's already streaking toward the river. Meanwhile, your partner rolls over, scratches something unmentionable, and mumbles something heroic about maybe hunting later. Sure, buddy. Welcome to the Stone Age, where you're not just awake, you're already 3 crises behind. Fire, humanity's greatest flex and your daily headache. As Cavewoman in Chief, you're the designated firekeeper whether you like it or not. That flame dies overnight. Congrats. You're now prehistoric Prometheus with bedhead trying to coax life back from ashes. Not Mr. I'll hunt later, over there. He's still sawing logs and probably dreaming about mammoths he'll never catch. Nope, this mess lands squarely on you. The woman squinting through one functional eye while threatening damp kindling with a stick. Real lighting sounds impressive in theory. Reality? It's 90% squatting, 10% creative cursing at uncooperative sparks. No matches, no flint, just friction, dried grass, and the kind of focus that only comes from knowing your family will ride if breakfast is late. You hunch over the fire pit, a sad circle of scorched rocks and regrets, rubbing sticks together like it's a magic trick. Sparks? Rare. Smoke? Constant. Your hands are blistered, your knees are shot, and 1 kid keeps asking, is it ready yet? Like you haven't pulled this off 263 days straight. Eventually, victory. A wisp of smoke appears. You blow gently, just as someone sneezes directly behind you. But you persevere. The tiny flame flickers to life, precious, fragile, and immediately endangered by both wind and your mate rolling over like a boulder in a bathrobe. Now the real work starts, feeding it like a temperamental pet, arranging cooking stones, and trying not to burn yourself on the same log for the 3rd consecutive day. Meanwhile, the kids circle like moths to flame, armed with sticks and clearly plotting arson. This isn't just about warmth. It's boiling water, cooking meals, scaring off predators, and making your damp cave feel slightly less like a medieval dungeon. You'll babysit this fire all damn day, feeding its mood swings like it's a toddler with anger issues. Rain comes. You'll cry. Someone kicks dirt in the pit. You'll consider murder. Hunters come back empty-handed. you're still making twig soup. Because in your world, if the fire dies, everything dies. So you guard it like your life depends on it. Because it does. Breakfast in the Paleolithic isn't some leisurely brunch situation. No menus, no coffee runs, definitely no "how do you like your eggs?" jokes, because eggs? That's just free-range danger waiting to hatch claws. The kids are already whining about food. You offer crushed nuts and get looks like you just served disappointment on a rock slab. Is there meat? They ask. You don't laugh. Meat requires both the firewood fairy and hunting fairy to collab. So you do what generations of women before you did. You forage. You grab your grass-woven basket, the OG reusable grocery bag, hoist a baby on your hip, and march into the wilderness. You're hunting, not for prey, but for anything vaguely edible. Wild onions, dandelion greens, berries that probably won't kill anyone, fingers crossed, and the occasional grub if you're feeling adventurous. Foraging is basically nature's unlabeled snack aisle. Some berries are nutritious, others are poison-dressed in juicy packaging. You learn this the hard way. Same as Cousin Thog, who spent 14 hours hallucinating after eating the spicy red ones. You return with your haul. Bitter tubers, mushrooms you're 70% sure are safe, and a half-rotten fruit that might be salvageable if you cut off the suspicious bits. Back at the cave, you become a culinary alchemist, smashing roots with rocks, stirring mystery mixtures with sticks. Your kitchen tools double as weapons, and your pantry is just a shady spot where ants haven't staged a takeover yet. You season with random herbs and pray the smell overpowers the look. Everyone eats with their hands. Find a bug? That's extra protein. Just when you think you're done, someone drops the bark bowl and asks for seconds. There are no leftovers, just hunger and another trip to nature's sketchy grocery store, aka that thorny patch by the creek. Welcome to breakfast. Bon appetit, cave style. Let's get real. Prehistoric kids were basically tiny chaos tornadoes with feet. As a cavewoman, you're not just mom. You're full-time bodyguard, EMT, therapist, sanitation worker, and snack vending machine. No daycare, no babysitters, not even basic furniture. Just dirt, some furs, and that ominous silence that means someone's attempting Darwin Award-worthy stunts. You're not raising one or two kids either. Birth control? More like birth roulette. Babies arrived when they wanted. Some didn't make it. Heartbreaking but true. And the survivors were either glued to your side or sprinting toward the nearest cliff with zero survival instincts. Your youngest is still nursing, your middle child is taste testing a lizard, and the oldest? Vanished, probably harassing bees again. You scan the horizon to distant screaming sounds. Classic. Meanwhile, you're trying to mush roots into something edible, one arm occupied by a wriggling toddler, your spine permanently shaped like a question mark from years of multitasking while crouched. Toys. Here's a stick. Entertainment? You're the whole damn circus. Every facial expression gets mimicked, every noise analyzed for comic potential. The second you need to focus, like not burning dinner, someone's either fire diving, pooping on the food prep area, or asking existential questions about death. Discipline tools? You've got two, the mom voice and the eyebrow. If those fail, there's always the classic parental threat passed down through generations. Put that down, or I swear to the spirits, I'll feed you to the wolves. But somehow, you love these tiny disasters. They're sticky, loud, and share your DNA. Despite the constant prehistoric pandemonium, you know they're watching, absorbing survival skills in a world that's actively trying to kill them daily. And that's your reward. These miniature humans who'll live to ruin breakfast another day. Let's bust this myth wide open. Caves weren't some Pinterest-worthy Zen dens of domestic bliss. They were muddy, smoky, perpetually damp holes stuffed with furs, snot-nosed kids, and suspicious smells that could knock out a mammoth. As resident cavewoman, you were basically the Stone Age Martha Stewart expected to turn this disaster zone into something livable with zero cleaning products. Brooms? Please. You swept, with twigs tied together using animal sinew and sheer desperation. Did it work? Not really. The dirt just politely rearranged itself into new formations. Your cave was nature's ultimate recycling program. Yesterday's ashes became tomorrow's dust bunnies, and anything dropped on the floor either disappeared forever or got eaten by something you didn't invite. Laundry day? Oh honey, when we say cave women did laundry, we mean they dragged crusty, blood-caked hides to freezing streams and beat them against rocks while praying not to become some wild boar's lunch mid-scrub. So, uninvented. Your cleaning arsenal consisted of sand, elbow grease, and internal screaming at a frequency only dogs could hear. Now let's talk waste management, the OG take-a-number system. Prehistoric plumbing meant going somewhere else, far enough that the smell didn't choke everyone, but close enough that toddlers didn't get snatched by predators on their potty break. If someone violated this delicate balance, you had a strongly worded cave chat complete with gestures and possibly a disciplinary stick. Dishes? That's generous. More like lick the bark bowl clean and pass it to your neighbor. Hygiene was a group project where clean just meant no visible insects. But this wasn't just about being tidy. It was survival science before germ theory existed. When Thog's family started dropping like flies after their hut developed that funky smell, you didn't need a microbiology degree to move your sleeping area 30 feet away and burn some herbs for good measure. The kicker? Nobody noticed your cleaning unless you didn't do it. Suddenly it's, why is the sleeping area full of wolf droppings? Or the drinking water tastes like squirrel butt again? No thank you. You'd rather take double fire duty than deal with that nonsense. Still, you kept scrubbing, sweeping, and swatting flies with the intensity of someone who understood cleanliness wasn't next to godliness. It was next to not dying from prehistoric dysentery. Dinner in the Stone Age wasn't some gourmet decision between pasta or salad. It was a desperate game of what won't poison us tonight. As head chef of Cave Kitchen, your options were limited to things that could be tenderized with rocks or charred beyond recognition. No pots, no pans, just fire, a flat rock, and the optimistic hope that this time the food wouldn't roll straight into the coals. Your cooking techniques could be summarized as 1. Skewer meat on stick. 2. Wave near flames. 3. Pray it doesn't taste like yesterday's regrets. You started by sorting whatever scraps were available. Maybe some questionable meat from the last hunt, assuming the flies hadn't claimed it first, or whatever the dogs, who technically weren't pets but never left, hadn't scavenged. No meat. Time to get creative with foraged goods, gnarly tubers, mushrooms you're 60% sure won't kill anyone, and that weird fruit that might be edible if you cut around the pulsating part. Preparation was primitive. Smash roots with rocks, throw things together in a bowl, stir with whatever stick wasn't currently being used as a child's sword. Your kitchen tools doubled as hunting gear, and your pantry was basically whatever shady spot the ants hadn't discovered yet. You'd wrap meat in large leaves, a trick you invented after 3 straight meals turned to charcoal. Add whatever herbs smelled least deadly, and hope the aroma overpowered the visual. Serving style? Rustic chic. Food went straight from fire to bark slabs to grubby hands, with the whole cave gathering like vultures who missed lunch. If they ate in silence, victory. Someone gagged, ignore it. Asked for seconds, laugh and tell them to go club their own dinner. Because in your world, cooking wasn't culinary art, it was edible survival. If it was warm and chewable, you deserved a Michelin star carved in stone. After a day of foraging, child wrangling, and nearly setting yourself on fire, you'd think a cave woman might finally get some me time. Joke's on you. That's when tribal socializing kicked in, a delicate dance of cooperation, gossip, and thinly veiled judgment disguised as small talk. You'd gather with the other women, not so much for fun as for mutual sanity preservation. Everyone sat in a loose circle doing chores, grinding seeds, untangling furs, pretending not to notice whose kid was eating mud again. These moments were equal parts therapy session and strategy meeting. Nothing got written down, but somehow everyone remembered everything. Who owed who for the nice hide, whose mate snored loudest, which berries made cousin Thog see colors. But let's not kid ourselves, it was also a low-key competition. Someone always had a better fire-starting method. Someone's man allegedly took down a boar single-handed. Someone else's toddler already knew not to lick poisonous beetles, making you suddenly feel like you were raising a walking liability. Trading happened, shells for berries, herbs for hide scraps, all while subtly side-eyeing the quality of other people's handiwork. That grass basket? Stitching's uneven. That fur cloak? Patchy. You'd say nothing, but you'd remember. Next gathering, you're bringing your A-game basket. The conversation flowed from weather patterns to childbirth horror stories to food shortages to whose partner forgot to bring water again. You'd nod, grunt in agreement, occasionally chuckle at stories about men getting bitten in embarrassing places by wildlife. Because nothing united women across millennia like schadenfreude over male incompetence. There was an unspoken hierarchy. The elder women commanded respect without asking. New moms got sympathetic looks mixed with side-eye. And you? Floating in the middle, capable, observant, exhausted. Because while you might not rule the tribe, everyone remembered who let their fire go out last week. And in this world, that was social currency more valuable than the shiniest rock. In the Stone Age, medicine wasn't some precise science. It was equal parts improvisation, optimism, and an alarming amount of tree bark. As cave medic, congratulations. You're now the tribe's unofficial doctor, pharmacist, and grief counselor, all rolled into one and paid in berries and back pain. No medical school here. Your training came from watching what happened when someone rubbed a funky plant on a wound and either got better or stopped moving permanently. Your knowledge was passed down through generations of trial, error, and a healthy dose of, well, Thog used this leaf once and didn't die immediately. Your day started with basic first aid, scraped knees, mysterious rashes, toes turning colors toes shouldn't. Your medicine pouch held crushed leaves, suspicious mushrooms, and at least one root that made people see dancing mammoths if you used too much. Bleeding? Spider bite? Sudden loss of will to live? You had a poultice for that. Might smell like despair, but sometimes it worked. Your tools? A sharpened bone, sterilized in fire, hopefully, some animal gut string, and a rock you'd convinced yourself was lucky. Stitches were done with fingers and stubbornness. Disinfectant? That's just hot water and a death glare. Anesthesia? Fermented berries and a stick to bite. Childbirth was your ultimate test. All squatting, screaming, and praying the baby didn't come out feet first during a thunderstorm. Success? You're a miracle worker. Complications? Blame the moon. Through it all, you projected calm. The woman who'd seen worse and probably still had the scar to prove it. You weren't just surviving. You were healing people with zero equipment and a 50-50 success rate. Modern doctors would call you unqualified. Here, you're a legend. Just don't run out of bark. Let's talk cave couture, because Paleolithic fashion wasn't about looking good. It was about not freezing to death in style. Your wardrobe wasn't curated. It was cobbled together from whatever recently stopped breathing nearby. No closets, no mirrors, definitely no one asking if your furs were ethically sourced. Your outfit started as animal hide that you, or someone exhausted, had scraped, stretched, and dried while fighting off flies the size of walnuts. Once soft enough not to slice your armpits open, it got sewn together with bone needles and sinew. No zippers, no buttons, just leather ties that somehow always knotted themselves in unreachable spots. The result? You were mostly covered and vaguely warm. The fur itched, the leather creaked, and there was always that mystery stain no one wanted to investigate. But it kept the wind out and the judgmental elders off your back. Footwear? Optional. If you had shoes, they were hide scraps tied to your feet with cords guaranteed to snap when you stepped in mud or something spiky. Socks? Uninvented. You just accepted cold toes and developed humility. Accessories did exist. Necklaces of bones, shells, or shiny rocks. Not for fashion, mind you. That bear tooth? From a bear someone else killed, though you did most of the screaming. You wore it with pride and creative storytelling. Hairstyles were practical, braids, knots, or whatever survived your kids using your hair as climbing ropes. Sometimes you added a feather just to feel fancy. Spot someone with charcoal eyeliner or red ochre blush. You'd think she really tried today. So yes, fashion existed in the Stone Age. Functional, biodegradable, And 100%, I murdered this look and the animal it came from. Ah, Paleolithic romance. Not candlelit dinners, but grunting across a campfire while hoping no one else claimed your crush first. Your dating pool was shallow, literally. Everyone was probably cousins. Courtship started subtle, like him bringing you a particularly fat grub, the Stone Age equivalent of flowers. You'd pretend to be impressed. He'd toss pebbles near you at gatherings. You'd ignore him, but not move away. The message? I see you. I have rocks. Let's cave. Eventually he'd approach, not with words, waste of good grunts, but with gifts. Maybe meat. Maybe a shiny rock. If he was serious, both. You'd accept with a nod. Congratulations, you're now unofficially a couple. Whole courtship. 3 minutes, 0 eye contact. Love was practical. He hunted. You gathered. He bragged about his boar kill. You pointed out you'd kept 3 kids alive on boiled roots and stress. Mutual respect was earned in grunts, firewood hauling, and pretending not to notice each other's cave farts. Affection showed in low-effort gestures, sharing the dry side of the fur blanket, not stepping on your weaving area, occasionally helping with water without being asked. That time he scared off a predator near your sleeping spot might have been butterflies in your stomach, or just undercooked tubers. Jealousy existed, of course. Some cave bimbo flashing her extra shiny rock collection. But if someone flirted too hard, you settled it with side-eye and public sarcasm. If that failed, a discreetly thrown rock usually did the trick. No poetry, no flowers, no love notes. Writing wasn't invented yet. Just loyalty, shared body heat, and an unspoken bond forged through mud, mammoth hunts, and mutual exhaustion. Romance? Maybe not by modern standards. But when he let you have the last bite of something cooked, that was true love. You wake up hoping today might finally be peaceful. Maybe just some light foraging, a few sibling squabbles, no surprise injuries. But nope, today the wolves are back. Or maybe it's bears. Or if you're really lucky, it's those neighbors from across the ridge. The ones who keep, accidentally, setting fire to your berry patch while claiming they thought it was theirs. As resident cavewoman, you're not just the homemaker. You're also part-time security detail. No fancy spear for you, though. That's reserved for the men who only remember how to use it after something's already bitten someone. Your weapons? A pointy stick, a heavy rock, and the dead-eyed stare of someone interrupted mid-root boiling. Wild animals don't care about your schedule. Leopards don't reschedule. Hyenas definitely don't knock. They just show up, teeth bared, usually when your hands are full of something squishy. You hear the snarls, grab the nearest child, and start shouting. Not because shouting helps, but because screaming is the only defense mechanism evolution gave you at this point. Sometimes you scare them off. Sometimes they grab a chunk of your food stash and vanish into the brush like furry little bandits. Sometimes you just hurl a rock and pray it connects. That's called strategic warfare in cave circles. Then there are the human threats, not the claw and fong variety, but the glaring gossip kind. Maybe they're eyeing your cave. Maybe they want your water source. Maybe someone in your group got frisky with someone in theirs, and now everything's awkward. Whatever the reason, tensions simmer like slightly spoiled mammoth stew. When things escalate, your people gather, not for civilized negotiations, but for competitive yelling. It's all chest thumping, aggressive gesturing, and comparing whose animal skins have fewer moth holes. Occasionally someone chucks a stick. Occasionally someone bleeds. Then everyone walks away feeling both victorious and vaguely confused, because the line between wild animal and problem neighbor is sometimes distressingly thin. Through it all, you stand your ground, covered in mud, clutching a baby in one arm and a club in the other, thinking, if one more thing tries to steal my dried berries today, I will lose what's left of my prehistoric mind. That's survival. That's vigilance. That's just another Tuesday in the Paleolithic. In a world where everything wants to kill you, from the weather to wildlife, to that suspicious mushroom you were 70% sure was safe, you eventually start making deals with invisible forces. Welcome to Paleolithic spirituality. Equal parts hope, fear, and interpretive finger painting. As resident cavewoman, you're spiritual by necessity. When Cousin Thog drops dead for no obvious reason, or the sun keeps disappearing every night, you need explanations. Without telescopes or germ theory, you reach the only logical conclusion: someone's pulling the strings. You and the other women gather around the fire, burning herbs that smell like scorched moss and old socks. You chant, hum, or grunt rhythmically, depending how ambitious you're feeling. No one's sure if the spirits are listening, but the smoke makes your eyes water, and that's basically the same thing. Then come the rituals. Someone's giving birth. Time to smear red ochre everywhere and whisper at a deer skull. Big hunt coming up. Mandatory naked fire dancing, while trying not to step on hot coals. Kid has a fever? Rub some questionable leaves on their forehead and pray to that rock formation that looks vaguely like an owl. These aren't just performances, they're serious business. In a world without medicine or meteorology, superstition is your only user manual. Then there's the cave art, the original social media, just with fewer influencers and more buffalo. You mix crushed minerals with spit, smear it on your fingers, and start documenting your life. A handprint here, a mammoth there, some stick figures running from what's definitely supposed to be a bear. It's abstract expressionism, survival edition. Sometimes you wonder who these paintings are for. The spirits? Future generations? Bored kids with extra mud? Doesn't matter. You paint because you must. Every mark says, I was here. I fought. I kept these tiny humans alive. I saw things that made me believe. It might not be theology by modern standards, but in your world of shadows and firelight, it's sacred enough. Death in the Paleolithic isn't rare, it's routine. It comes by fever, falls, fangs, or sometimes just not waking up. And when it arrives, it doesn't care about timing, mid-foraging trip, during a storm, while someone's trying to start a fire with damp moss and misplaced confidence. As Cavewoman, you feel it first in your chest, that tightening when cries turn to silence. The tribe moves slowly, gathering around the body not with hysteria, but with the quiet resignation of people who've done this before. There's no funeral home, no priest, no memorial slideshow. Just hands, stone tools, and knowledge passed from your grandmothers. How to prepare the body, honor the life, let go without falling apart. You clean them, you wrap them. Sometimes you decorate them. A shell necklace, red ochre on the forehead, a flower if you can find one. Not because it changes anything, but because it matters. It marks the difference between a corpse and someone who was loved. Burial depends on terrain, soft soil if you're lucky, a rocky crevice if not. In winter, there's fire, small and crackling while people speak softly or not at all. The kids fidget. The elders stare into the flames like they're trying to remember the dead person's laugh. Grief doesn't follow schedules. It lingers in quiet moments, stealing your appetite, replacing it with memories. That time they brought you a weird fruit, when they tripped over a root and blamed the wind. Yet life pushes forward. You still gather roots, mend cloaks, scold children, because the mammoths don't care that you're mourning, and neither does the rain. But at night by firelight, you whisper their name once more, just to be sure the spirits heard. And maybe, just maybe, someone else does too. When the sun sets and fires crackle to life, something magical happens in the cave. Bellies are mostly full. Kids are, temporarily, still. The night stretches long and dark and full of possibilities. This is when the stories begin, not for entertainment, but survival. Because if people are listening to tales, they're not thinking about how cold, hungry, or terrifyingly mortal they are. As Cavewoman, you've earned your spot by the fire. Not the center. That's for elders who've survived more winters than seems possible, but close enough to correct someone when they botch the bit about the snake and the thunderstorm. Your voice joins generations of storytellers, mixing half-truths, real events, and just enough exaggeration to keep the kids awake. You tell of hunts that almost went wrong, but didn't. The woman who outran a bear while 9 months pregnant. The river spirit who becomes a bird to warn of floods. These stories are survival lessons in disguise. Want kids to stop wandering off? Tell them about the cave ghost who steals loud toddlers. Want men to stop wasting arrows? Remind them of the idiot who missed a mammoth and got peed on by an elk. The little ones listen wide-eyed. This is their school, their history class, their bedtime routine. No books, no paper, just memory, rhythm, and your questionable acting of a charging boar. Sometimes stories become myths. A roaring fire, a strange dream, a shadow on the cave wall. Suddenly someone's a hero or a god, or the reason stars move. These tales get passed down as truth, carved into bone, painted in ochre, whispered from mother to child. Because you don't just survive, you remember. You turn near disasters into legends, names into echoes that outlast teeth and time. Legacy isn't made of tools or furs. It's made of stories told in the dark. Ask most people to picture a cave woman, and they'll imagine some cartoonish brute, unibrowed, club-wielding, wearing a leopard bikini and grunting. A side character in history, primitive, not too bright, dragging kids around while men invent fire. Let's set the record straight. They've got it completely backwards. Cave women weren't helpless sidekicks. They were the backbone of everything. The medics, the foragers, the shelter builders, the child rearers, the memory keepers. They fought infections with bark, starvation with creativity, winter with nothing but hides and hope. They didn't write textbooks. They were the textbooks. Everything their children knew came through their hands. Their stories, their warnings whispered by fires. They weren't just surviving. They were organizing chaos daily. While some guy spent 3 hours failing to spear a rabbit, cave women were making dinner from roots and mushrooms, and that bird he stepped over twice. And beauty? Please. These women wore the sun on their skin, braided their hair with bones, tattooed themselves with soot and meaning. Their jewelry came from riverbeds they walked daily, baby on one hip, firewood on the other. They've been misunderstood because they didn't build monuments. But they left fingerprints in cave paint, burial sites arranged with care, tools worn smooth from constant use. Here's the kicker. They did it all while bleeding monthly, dodging predators, avoiding spoiled meat, and occasionally giving birth next to smoldering mammoth dung. No applause, no rewards, just another day, another fire, another rock to scrub. So next time someone calls early humans primitive, remember who tanned the hides, carried the fire, told the first bedtime stories while sharpening sticks. It wasn't some bearded hero, it was her. The fire's glow painted dancing shadows on the cave walls as you settled into the evening rhythm. With the children finally asleep, or at least not actively trying to kill themselves, this was your sacred time, the few precious moments between surviving and actually living. You reached for your weaving, fingers moving automatically as they had every night for seasons beyond counting. The reeds were coarse against your calloused hands, but the repetitive motion soothed your spirit. Across the fire, Old Mother hummed softly while grinding herbs between stones, her own nightly ritual. These were the quiet acts that held your world together when the men were off pretending to hunt. A sudden rustle at the cave entrance made your head snap up. Not the men returning, too early for that. Your hand found the digging stick before your eyes adjusted to see little bird clutching something feathery to her chest. I found it near the stream, she whispered, unfolding her hands to reveal a fledgling owl with one mangled wing. Your first instinct was to toss it out. Another mouth to feed was the last thing you needed. But the way your daughter cradled the creature stirred something ancient in your blood. Bring the moss. You sighed, setting aside your weaving. As you splinted the wing with practiced fingers, you realized this was perhaps your most important lesson. Not how to skin game or start fires, but how to nurture life in this brutal world. The men took with spears and strength, but you gave with hands that could both wound and heal. The children gathered round as you showed them how to feed the owl scraps without losing fingers. Even the boys listened intently. They'd need this wisdom when they became fathers. Your mate would scoff if he saw this, call it a waste of good meat. But you knew better. Compassion wasn't weakness. It was the reason your people had survived when stronger tribes had vanished into the cold. As the owl blinked its golden eyes at you, you saw the truth reflected back. You weren't just feeding bodies, but tending the fragile flame of humanity itself. The men might bring the occasional haunch of meat, but you stoked the fires that kept the dark at bay, both the literal ones and those inside each trembling chest. Tomorrow would bring more back-breaking labor, more heart-stopping terror when a child wandered too far, more grinding exhaustion that seeped into your bones. But for now, in this circle of firelight with small hands learning the oldest dance, you were more than a cave woman. You were the keeper of the future. The first light of dawn crept into the cave like an uninvited guest, pale fingers of sunlight poking at your closed eyelids. Another night spent curled around the children, your body forming a living barrier between them and the cave's cold stone. You blinked awake to the familiar chorus, someone coughing, a baby fussing, and the distant drip-drip of water echoing through the cavern. Home. You untangled yourself carefully, noting how your joints protested louder each morning. The years of grinding grain, hauling water, and sleeping on stone had etched themselves into your bones. But no time for that now. The day didn't care about your aches. Outside, the world was shaking off its frosty blanket. Spring had been teasing at winter's edges for days, and today the earth finally smelled alive again. Damp soil, new growth, the faint metallic tang of the nearby streams swollen with meltwater. This was the season of both promise and peril. Your bare feet found the familiar path to the waterhole, the same path your mother had walked, and hers before. The smooth depressions in the stone testified to generations of women making this same journey. As you knelt to fill your water skins, your reflection rippled in the quiet pool, a face older than its years, eyes that had seen too much, hands that never stopped working. Behind your image, the first brave flowers of spring nodded at the water's edge. The return trip was slower, the heavy water skins dragging at your shoulders. That's when you saw it, a dark shape in the meadow beyond the trees. Your body froze before your mind processed the danger. Bear? Wolf? No, the shape was wrong. As you squinted, it resolved into something far more terrifying: strangers. 3 figures, moving with purpose toward your home. Their gait spoke of confidence, their weapons of violence. Your breath caught like a thorn in your throat. The children were back at the cave with only old mother to protect them. You dropped the water skins and ran, feet flying over familiar roots and stones. Every childhood horror story about raiders and stolen children flashed through your mind. The cave came into view just as the strangers reached its mouth. You arrived panting, arms spread wide in front of your children like a mother bird shielding her nest. But then, laughter. Deep, familiar, stupid laughter. Your mate and his brothers stumbled into view, arms laden with the season's first real haul, fish from the stream, early greens, even a hare. The strangers had been nothing but shadows and your own exhaustion playing tricks. The relief left you lightheaded, as the men boasted about their, frankly mediocre, catch. You noticed what they hadn't: the delicate mushrooms peeking from damp earth, the bird eggs hidden in the grass, the medicinal plants just beginning to sprout. While they'd been crashing through the undergrowth, you'd been reading the land's subtle signs, as your mother taught you. That night, as you distributed portions, the best cuts going to the children and elders first, you caught your mate's eye across the fire. He raised his cup in a silent toast, and for once, there was no mockery in his gaze, just weary respect. The unspoken truth hung between you. His spear might feed you today, but your knowledge fed everyone tomorrow, and the next day, and all the days after. As the fire burned low, you took up your nightly task, sorting tomorrow's supplies, checking each child for ticks or fevers, setting aside the best tools for morning. The work never ended, but neither would your people. Not while your hands still moved, your eyes still saw, your heart still beat. The cave walls held the echoes of generations past, but you were writing the next chapter with every stitch, every meal, every story whispered in the dark. The rains came like an uninvited guest overstaying its welcome. Day after day of relentless downpour that turned the cave floor to mud and everyone's temper to tinder. You watched the water cascade over the cave entrance like a liquid curtain, each droplet carrying the thread of damp furs, spoiled stores, and restless children trapped indoors. Again with the stick? Old Mother grumbled as your youngest started rhythmically banging a bone against the cave wall. The sound echoed like a demented heartbeat. mingling with the constant drip from the ceiling where the water found its way through cracks. You shot the child a look that usually worked, but today, even your legendary eyebrow of doom failed to quell the restlessness. The air hung thick with wood smoke and wet dog smell, though technically the dog was more of a semi-tamed wolf who decided your hearth was preferable to the wilderness. Your mate and his brothers huddled near the fire, resharpening tools that didn't need sharpening for the third time that morning. Even they were going stir-crazy. You could tell by how they kept sneaking glances at the downpour like it might stop if they glared hard enough. Then disaster. A shriek from the storage nook. You turned to see your middle child holding up a mold-covered basket of precious dried berries, their winter food supply now fuzzy with blue-green death. The collective groan from the cave's inhabitants could have drowned out the storm itself. That's when you snapped. Enough. Your voice cut through the gloom like a flint knife. Everyone up. Even the men jumped at your tone. You pointed to the children. Gather every container we have. To Old Mother. Show them how to scrub with sand. To your mate. You're on roof duty. Find those leaks before we're sleeping in a pond. What followed wasn't pretty, but it was effective. The cave transformed into a hive of activity. Children scrubbed moldy baskets under Old Mother's supervision. The men rigged an overhang of hides to divert the worst drips. You led the salvage operation, sorting what could be saved from what had to go. And then, inspiration struck. You dragged out the last intact basket and began teaching the children to weave with damp reeds you'd gathered between downpours. At first their attempts were laughable, more knots than basket, but soon even the boys were focused, their little tongues poking out in concentration. The rhythmic work calmed them better than any scolding could. As night fell, the cave felt different. The drips had lessened to a manageable patter. The reek of mildew was fading. And though the storm still raged outside, inside you'd created something remarkable. Order from chaos, purpose from restlessness. Your mate caught your eye across the fire where he sat surrounded by children showing off their lopsided weaving attempts. He didn't speak. Words weren't his way. But the nod he gave you carried more respect than any flowery speech. In that moment, you both understood the truth. His strength could face a bear, but yours held together the world when everything threatened to fall apart. Later, as you lay listening to the steady breathing of your family, the rain's rhythm finally sounded less like a threat and more like a lullaby. The storm would pass, the sun would return, and you would be ready, because that's what you did. Not with roars or spears, but with stubbornness, ingenuity, and hands that never stopped working to turn chaos into home. The first frost came like a thief in the night, stealing the last remnants of autumn with icy fingers. You awoke to a world transformed, every blade of grass wearing a crystalline coat, your breath hanging visible in the air, the cave's entrance glittering with delicate frost feathers. Winter had announced its arrival with silent grandeur. You pulled your hides tighter and stepped outside, the cold biting at your bare feet immediately. The children would need warmer wraps. The thought set your day's agenda before the sun had fully risen. Another morning sacrificed to survival's endless to-do list. As you surveyed the frozen landscape, memories of last winter's hardships flashed before you. The gnawing hunger when stores ran low, the way little ones' ribs had started to show through their skin, Old Mother's cough that lingered until spring. Not this year. You'd prepared better, worked harder, gathered more. But nature always kept score, and winter was the ultimate accountant. The storage pits were your first stop. You lifted the stone covers with calloused hands, inspecting your carefully organized hoards. Dried berries in birch bark containers, smoked fish wrapped in leaves, nuts stored in woven baskets lined with clay. Your nose told the story before your eyes did. That faint sour note beneath the earthy smells. One of the fish bundles had spoiled. You sorted through it with practiced efficiency, salvaging what could still be eaten, setting aside the rest for the semi-tamed wolf who lurked at the edge of camp. Waste was a luxury your people couldn't afford. The children found you there, their morning energy undimmed by the cold. "Can we make the winter marks today?" Little Bird asked, bouncing on her toes. You smiled despite yourself. The winter count, your people's way of tracking the passage of time. was normally drawn after the first snowfall, but the frost had clearly sparked their imagination. "After we check the traps," you said, handing them each a strip of jerky for breakfast. Their disappointed groans turned to excitement when you added, "And if we find nothing, we'll need to make new ones." The prospect of crafting tools always won them over. The men were already gone, off to hunt before the big game moved to winter grazing grounds. You could picture them out there, moving silently through the frosted woods, their breath making ghosts in the morning air. They might return with meat, they might not. Either way, your job remained the same. Make sure there was something to eat regardless. The morning passed in a blur of activity, checking empty traps, as expected, reinforcing the ones that remained, gathering the last few hardy greens that still poked through the frost. The children helped where they could, their small hands surprisingly deft at weaving cordage from plant fibers. You showed them how to layer insulation in their footwear, how to spot the edible lichens that grew on north-facing rocks, how to listen for the subtle sounds of life beneath winter's quiet. By midday, your fingers were stiff with cold, but the storage pits were better organized, the weakest traps repaired, and the children's winter foot wraps reinforced. As you sat by the fire rubbing feeling back into your hands, Old Mother settled beside you with a grunt. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The bowl of steaming broth she pushed into your hand said everything. You drank deeply, feeling the warmth spread through your chest. The afternoon brought the winter count, your favorite ritual. You mixed ochre with melted fat, while the children gathered suitable flat stones. Then, under your guidance, they began marking the important events of the past year. The great salmon run, the bear attack, the birth of twins to a neighboring clan. Their small hands moved carefully, creating the symbols that would help them remember, that would teach their own children someday. As the sun dipped low, painting the frost in pinks and golds, you heard shouts from the valley, the hunting party returning. You set aside your painting and went to meet them, the children racing ahead. The men's faces told the story before you saw their meager haul, a few scrawny hairs, nothing more. Your mate met your eyes with a shrug that said, "We tried," but where they saw failure, you saw opportunity. "Good," you said, taking the hairs. The children need practice with small game. Their faces lit up at the prospect of helping with the butchering. As you led the way back to the fire, you mentally adjusted the meal plans, stretched the meat with extra roots, used the bones for broth, saved the hides for mittens. Later, as the smell of roasting hair filled the cave, you watched your family gathered around the winter count stones. The children were explaining their markings with great seriousness, the men listening with unexpected patience. In that moment, you saw the truth of your life, not an endless struggle against winter's hunger, but a continuous chain of knowledge passed hand to hand, generation to generation. The frost outside might kill flowers, but inside your cave, something far more precious was taking root. The certainty that no matter how harsh the winter, your people would remember, would learn, would endure. And you would be the keeper of that flame, as your mother had been before you, as your daughters would be after. The cycle was as certain as the seasons themselves. The world outside had turned to ice and silence, but inside the cave, life pulsed with stubborn vitality. You stood at the entrance, watching the snowflakes dance their endless winter ballet, each one a tiny miracle of symmetry. The children had tried catching them on their tongues earlier, their laughter bouncing off the cavern walls until Old Mother shushed them with a grumble about wasting warm breath. Your breath fogged the air as you turned back to survey your domain, the fire crackling steadily. You'd built up the reserves last autumn for this very reason. The sleeping areas lined with fresh furs, collected over 3 summers of careful hunting. The food stores meticulously organized. Even with rationing, your stomach growled its protest. Everything spoke of preparation, of foresight, of the quiet power that came from knowing how to outsmart the seasons. A tug at your wrap brought your attention downward. Little Bird held up a tangle of sinew and bone, another failed attempt at a winter count necklace. You knelt in the frosty dirt, ignoring the cold seeping through your knees, and began untangling the mess with fingers that remembered being this small, this clumsy, this desperate to create something meaningful. "Watch," you whispered, showing her the old trick. How to twist the sinew just so. How to secure the bone bead without choking the knot. Her eyes widened as the mesh transformed into a wearable story under your hands. The other children gathered round, their squabbles forgotten in the face of this new magic. You hid a smile. They didn't need to know you'd learned this the same way, at your own mother's side, during another endless winter. The cave darkened as the storm intensified outside, the wind howling like the wolves that lurked at the edges of your world. The firelight painted moving shadows on the walls as you settled into the evening's rhythm, mending a torn wrap here, sorting medicinal herbs there, all while keeping half an ear on the children's chatter as they worked on their necklaces. Even the men had joined in, their big hands surprisingly deft as they helped drill holes in bone fragments. Then, a sound that didn't belong. Not the wind, not the fire, but something else. You froze, your senses straining. There it was again, a faint, rhythmic tapping from deep in the cave's recesses. The children fell silent as they noticed your alertness. Your mate reached for his spear, his brothers following suit. You stood slowly, motioning for the children to stay put, and took a torch from the fire. The flickering light revealed nothing but familiar stone walls as you moved deeper into the cave, your bare feet silent on the cold stone. The tapping grew clearer, not random, but purposeful. Someone, or something, was sending a message. The tunnel narrowed until you had to turn sideways, the torchlight revealing the source of the sound. A thin stream of water dripping rhythmically onto a flat stone, the droplets echoing through the cavern like drum beats. Nature's own winter music. You exhaled, the tension leaving your shoulders. No threat, just the earth reminding you of its endless creativity. When you returned to the main chamber, the children's worried faces made you pause. Then you did something unexpected. You began to move. Slowly at first, then with more confidence, your body mimicked the water's rhythm, your feet tapping, your hands clapping. The children's confusion turned to delight as they caught on, joining the impromptu dance. Even Old Mother tapped her gnarled fingers against her thigh, her scowl softening just a fraction. The men watched, bemused, as the cave filled with laughter and movement, the storm outside forgotten. Your mate shook his head, but didn't stop you. He learned long ago that your ideas, however strange, usually had purpose. And this one did, to show that even in winter's grip, joy could take root. That survival wasn't just about enduring, but about finding light in the dark. Later, when the children had fallen asleep in exhausted heaps and the men were taking turns keeping watch, just in case, you sat by the fire, adding another row of stitches to a new wrap. Your mate settled beside you, his presence warm and solid. No words passed between you. None were needed. The storm still raged outside. The winter still had months to go. But here, in this moment, you'd carved out something precious. Not just warmth, not just safety, but the unshakable knowledge that no matter how long the night, morning would always come again. And when it did, you'd be ready, not just with stored food and sturdy hides, but with stories to tell, dances to teach, and hands forever willing to untangle life's knots for those who came after. That was your true legacy, not the things you'd saved, but the love you'd planted deep in the heart of winter, where it would outlast even the longest night. The world beyond the cave had become a frozen wasteland, the snowdrifts swallowing familiar landmarks whole. You stood at the entrance each morning, scanning the monochrome landscape for signs of life or danger. The air smelled different in deep winter, sharper, cleaner, with none of the earthy richness of other seasons. Just cold, endless cold that seeped into your bones and refused to leave. Inside the cave, the rhythm of winter life had settled into its own kind of normal. The children's energy, once boundless, had turned inward. They moved more slowly now, conserving warmth like the embers you banked each night. Even their squabbles had taken on a lethargic quality, more half-hearted shoving than real conflict. You missed their summer wildness, but understood this hibernative state was winter's gift, a way to endure what couldn't be changed. Today's task was medicine making. Old Mother had developed a rattling cough that kept the whole cave awake at night. You sorted through your carefully stored herbs, some gathered at great risk from cliff edges last spring, others traded for at the summer gathering. The dried plants crumbled between your fingers, releasing memories with their scents. The sunny hillside where the yellow flowers grew, the marshy lowland that nearly claimed your foot when you reached for those reeds. As you worked, grinding roots with a smooth stone, little birds settled beside you. "Tell me about the green thyme," she whispered. The request caught you off guard, not the words, but the longing in them. You realized with a pang that she'd been barely walking when winter began. She might not remember grass that wasn't frozen, air that didn't hurt to breathe. Your hands stilled as you searched for the right words. How to describe spring to someone who'd known only ice? You started simply. The way new leaves unfurled like tiny hands, the sound of birds returning, the miraculous moment when the first shoots pushed through bare earth. Her eyes widened as you spoke, drinking in images of a world transformed. Then, inspiration. You reached for a pouch of dried berries and began arranging them on a flat stone. "This is the river in spring," you said, creating a winding line of red berries. "Here are the hills, a scattering of yellow. And these are the first flowers." Blueberries became clusters of blooms under your fingers. The other children crept closer as your landscape grew, adding their own contributions, twigs for trees, bits of moss for bushes. Soon the entire cave floor became a living map of the world waiting beneath the snow. The men watched from their corner, their usual restlessness soothed by the children's quiet focus. Even Old Mother's coughing eased as she observed the makeshift diorama taking shape. Your mate surprised you most. He rose and fetched his precious store of salt, sprinkling it along the riverbanks to represent spring's first meltwater. The gesture spoke volumes, his quiet endorsement of this moment of beauty in their harsh existence. Night fell early, as it always did in winter's heart. But something had shifted in the cave's atmosphere. The children's questions about spring kept coming, their voices bright with new hope. You answered each one, weaving stories of warmer days into the fabric of their memories until they could almost feel the sun on their skin. Later, as you lay listening to Old Mother's easier breathing, the medicine was working. You realized what had happened today. You hadn't just described spring, you'd planted its promise deep in their hearts, given them something to outlast winter's hunger. The land outside might be frozen, but inside this cave, inside these children, life was stirring, restless and green. Your mate's hand found yours in the dark, his calloused fingers warm against yours. No words passed between you, but none were needed. The message was clear: spring would come. The earth always kept its promises. And until then, you'd keep theirs, the ones looking to you with eyes full of trust, waiting for you to lead them back into the light. The world held its breath in that magical space between winter and spring, when the snow still clung stubbornly to shadows, but the air carried whispers of change. You stood at the cave entrance at dawn, watching your breath curl upward in pale tendrils, and felt it, the subtle shift even before you saw evidence. Some ancient part of you, older than memory, recognized the moment when the earth began stirring from its long slumber. The children sensed it too. They'd become restless as the light grew longer, their winter lethargy giving way to bursts of energy that ricocheted off the cave walls. This morning they'd woken with their usual clamor, begging to go outside despite the lingering chill. You'd relented. They needed this as much as the plants needed sun. You watched them now, their winter-pale limbs flashing as they played some complicated game involving sticks and a leather ball. Their laughter rang across the clearing, startling a pair of crows into flight. The sound was sweeter than the first birdsong, proof that your people had weathered another winter. Your mate appeared beside you, his shoulder brushing yours as he surveyed the scene. Without speaking, he pressed something cold into your hand, a smooth river stone, its surface etched with careful markings. You turned it over, recognizing the symbols for gratitude and strength. His work, done in stolen moments by firelight. The lump in your throat had nothing to do with the crisp morning air. Movement at the tree line caught your eye. Old Mother emerging from the forest with surprising spryness, her arms full of tender green shoots. The first edible greens of spring. She'd beaten you to them, the old fox. When she saw you watching, she lifted her chin in that familiar defiant gesture, as if to say she wasn't dead yet. You hid a smile. Some battles never changed. The day unfolded in a flurry of activity unlike winter's measured pace. The men left to check the fishing traps, now that the ice was breaking, while you and Old Mother began the great spring sorting, airing out furs, taking inventory of dwindling winter stores, planning for the coming seasons. The work felt lighter today, as if the Earth's awakening had lent you its energy. At midday, you called the children back to help with a special task, preparing the spring renewal ceremony. They gathered around as you mixed the last of the red ochre with melted fat, creating the sacred paint that would adorn both bodies and cave walls today. Their small hands helped grind the pigments, their faces solemn with the weight of tradition. When the men returned with fish, actual fresh food after months of dried and smoked provisions, the cave erupted in celebration. You cooked the fish with the greens Old Mother had gathered, creating the first fresh meal in what felt like lifetimes. The children ate with uncharacteristic focus, their bodies instinctively craving the nutrients they'd gone without. As dusk painted the sky in violets and golds, you led the ceremony. With careful strokes, you renewed the cave paintings, tracing over the mammoths and hunters, adding new symbols for the winter survived. The children added their handprints in fresh ochre, their small fingers leaving bright marks beside yours. Even the men participated, retelling stories of winter's challenges with embellishments that grew wilder with each retelling. Later, when the fire burned low and the children had fallen asleep with full bellies, you stepped outside alone. The night air still carried winter's bite, but beneath it pulsed something warm and vital. You pressed your palm against the cold earth and felt it. The faintest tremor of life returning, the promise of renewal written in the language of roots and stones. This was your truth, written not in ochre but in seasons, the knowledge that no winter lasted forever, no night was without dawn. You'd guided your people through the darkness once more, not with spear or strength, but with the quiet power of remembering how to prepare, how to adapt, how to hope. The cave behind you hummed with sleeping breaths, the walls holding another year's worth of stories. Ahead lay spring's work, planting, hunting, building. But for now, in this sacred space between seasons, you simply stood beneath the stars and breathed, a woman between worlds, your feet planted firmly in both.